Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick, axslav, ranish, as we take a look at some of the strategies and tactics used in the game of Starcraft 2 and how to use some tactics to improve your game back at home when you play in the ladder. We're going to take a look at a bunch of the games from yesterday's WCS America Group H of the round of 32 matches. We're going to take a look at Moonglade versus Illusion first, the third map of their first series, and talk about Roach Hydra in Zerg vs Terran. We're then going to move on to talking about how to better control your engagements and know when to make that engagement in PvT. Taking a look at Illusion versus Alicia, the first game. Then we're going to take a look at a cool little Hellbat timing that Illusion uses versus Alicia in game number 2. After these three segments, it's going to be onto the viewer Q&A. So any questions you want, send them to me on Twitter at @ISAxslav, or also in the YouTube comments of any of the Rules of Engagement videos at youtube.com/official MLGSC2. So we're going to start off in this first segment. It's going to be Moonglade versus Illusion. And we're going to take a look at the 3-base speed Roach opening. There's a lot of ways to go Roach Hydra, but this is the way that Moonglade chooses to do it. And we're going to take the ideology behind this opening. Then we're going to talk about tech additions to Roach Hydra. So something to throw in on so it's not just plain Roaches and Hydralists. And then we're going to take a look at drop play versus Roach Hydra. So we're going to start this game off at the 7-minute mark, and we're just going to look at Moonglade's build order. Because this is what's important here, is looking at his version of the 3-base speed Roach attack. So if you want to do the 3-base speed Roach timing, the whole goal of this timing is to get a good economy, then get a whole bunch of Roaches, and slow down or delay your opponent's third base as long as possible. So the order of buildings you want to get, first, you want to make sure you're safe from the Hellions. So you get the Spine Core out there where it can kind of help control the space that you need to move your queens back and forth between your third and your natural. Then you want to get these evolution chambers right around the point you're closing in on 55-60 food. And the important thing is to place them in a way that helps path the Hellions. And then going forward, if you're going speeding baiting, those type of units, typically your next gas goes to these upgrades. But with Roaches, what you do is you get the Evo chambers, then you go ahead and tech lair. And then when the lair is, probably about halfway done or so, you go ahead and start your Roach upgrades 1-1. And this way, all your upgrades will be timed out to be perfect, because these Roach upgrades take 160 seconds each one of the basic evolution chamber upgrades. And then you also want to get Roach speed. And that Roach speed upgrade, of course, is going to take 110 seconds. So you can start a little bit later. You start the lair first, and when these upgrades are underway, your lair is finishing, start Roach speed, and all three of those should finish at around the same time. Of course, up to this point, ideally you don't build any Roaches if you don't have to defend. Right around the time when you start building Roach speed is when you really want to start going into Roach production. At this point, you should be on 4 gases, right? 2 at the main, 2 at the natural, none at the third. It's close to 55-60 drones, that type of range, and then just crank out Roaches like a maniac. And again, going forward, the goal here is right when these 3 key upgrades complete, you're going to move out, and you're going to deny your opponent's third base, right? So just, if they try to go out there and land it, you attack them. You can poke at the front door of the natural, and if it's exposed, if you can get a good trade, go in and pick off some Widow Mines at the front with your Overseer, pick away at the depots, pick away at some of the Marines, whatever you can pick off at. But you don't need to commit yourself to killing your natural, because remember, you're on 3 bases. The whole goal, though, is because you're not on 6 gas, because you're not on an insane drone count, you're up to 70 drones, you do want to delay your opponent's third base for as long as possible. So you head out here across the map with this Roach attack, and you see what you can do to delay the third base. So first thing is check, does he have third base? Change Shooting doesn't see it quite yet. He sees the army. Right when you get these Roaches, you should be able to take on a Terran army. If you're not stronger than a Terran army, right when this first wave of Roaches comes into play, either, they blind countered you, making a whole ton of Marauders, in which case you should have noticed that earlier and probably switched your build up and just gone to speeding baiting. Or it's because you were out macroed, or something really bad happened early in the game as far as drone losses. So at this point in the game, you should not be afraid of handling the Terran army right at this point. Roaches, of course, build very fast because the larvae are very cheap. Yes, they're not cost efficient versus bio, but you're going to have much, much more of them than the bio because of the production advantage of Zerg. Now, there comes a point where obviously the bio's going to hit a certain point. They're going to have, enough Widow Mines that you can't delay the third forever, right? And so that's where you get into, a real game of Roach Hydra, or even if you didn't choose to open with this type of bust, you might even get into a situation right now where Moonglade's at, where you're starting to get a large army. you can tell you're not going to kill your opponent with Roach Hydra, right? Early on. They're going to continue to go on throughout the game. So this is where you have to think, okay, it's probably getting to a max versus max situation at some point in this game. Max versus max, Roach Hydras are going to just get slaughtered by a full max Terran army, pretty much any full max Terran army. So if you can tell, you know, you're not going to get an enormous advantage before that point, what you want to do is start your tech. So you can see here, Moonglade has already got this Infestor tech on the way because he knows he wants his 200 Fruit army to have some additions to make their Roach Hydra be able to compete against the mass bio army of Illusion. Or if it was mech, you know, it would be Vipers. For Spio, you can go Vipers too, but Infestors are great as well. So make sure that when you're around 150, 160 food, if you don't think you can break them with an attack, you start teching to add in those additional tech units to support the Roach Hydra. So now we're going to take a look at one of the weaknesses of Roach Hydra that everyone talks about is, of course, his drop play. You can see Illusion, in this case, is actually going for that drop play. He's starting to send out some of these medevacs to all these locations. And the important thing about Roach Hydra is, unlike a Zerg build that involves Muteless, right? You have nothing that can really kill these medevacs, so it can be very annoying. You have to split your units in multiple directions, just deal with it the best you can. And also, unlike a composition that involves either Banelings or Infestors, you can't fight a Terran army without your full Roach Hydra force. If you have Banelings, if Terran goes too far on the creep, those Banelings, of course, can punish that Terran by just taking them out on the creep where the Banelings are fast. If you have Infestors and a Terran pushes too fast, they bunch too much, then Infestors can take them out without having to have your whole army there. But if you're going Roach Hydra, or maybe just a few Infestors to support, if you want to take on the max Terran army, you need basically every single one of your resources there in the battle, which means stack defense is a little bit harder to afford when you're doing this type of strategy. So the other thing to think about is because it's hard to get stack defense, the drops are dangerous. As a Terran player, you really want to be using those drops. Now, one thing, I'm going to pause right here and talk about what Illusion has been doing. So if you notice what he's been doing, we can actually just bring it up on the full map, right? He hasn't just been dropping. He doesn't just send one drop and be like, okay, Zerg, take this. No, because Zerg is going to have units there. They're going to deal with it fine. If you want to use a lot of drop play, it's always much more effective if you combine it with some other drop play, or you combine it with a threat from the front, and then that'll get the Zerg to be distracted. So as we saw here, right, he was sending one drop over here. At the same time, he had a drop over here. And then, of course, when his Zerg responds to these, what does he do? He moves, he moves this drop, basically, to the main. This drop actually just pretends to go to the main, and then it really just heads back to that fourth base. And Moonglade has to keep up moving on every single front. If he doesn't keep up with these movements, then, he'll lose 5-6 drones. That adds up and adds up and adds up. And an additional thing he has to think about is all of a sudden, Illusion is sending his other army, right along this way to threaten here as well. So the more different points you threaten and you scare your Terran opponent, or your Zerg opponent, excuse me, the harder it is for him to make the split-second decisions on which units to send in which direction, how many units to have in each different spot, and those sorts of things. So it's very good to do multiple things at once when you're doing drop play to try to get an advantage. But what's very, very important is when you're doing this drop play and when you're threatening with your front army, right? You have to be in a situation where you're like, okay, I have my main army right here, but this isn't my full army, right? I have 184 food, but I've got, well, actually, that's an empty drop right now, but I've got, 10 food right here. I've got 2 food and medevacs over there. I've got 20 food and medevacs heading up for drops. So my main army isn't my full army. It's really not. It's actually about half of his full army at this point in the game. So it's great to go and poke and be aggressive and threaten somewhere to force him to react. But you don't want to have your small force get stuck in a committed fight versus overwhelming force that you're not going to trade efficiently. And all the great damage from the drop play kind of gets undone in a situation like this. Of course, with the medevacs and widow mines, often you can escape, right? So it's kind of okay, but ideally you minimize those large-scale confrontations unless you're fully prepared to deal with them. The goal there isn't to kill the roaches. The goal is to get the roaches to come over here, so then, of course, the drop over here does more damage. So you don't really want to engage the Zerg too much with that main army. What you want to do, you just want to draw them over here, right? So he draws them in the back, the army comes out here. And then again, it's the same thing. This is not his full army. It's not, a 200 fruit army. So if the Zerg comes over here, as a Terran player, you want to run away. You want to try to engage him as minimally as possible. And then, of course, The idea is you drag your units in this direction, then while they're attacking here, if you can keep retreating, I mean, he's fighting here and he's not losing too badly, but it still is losing him some ground. But what's more important is that he's gaining ground over here, right? Killing more and more drones over here, and while the Zerg player is distracted over at the 4th base, he even killed this hatchery here as well. So this type of multi-pronged draw play is really, really good. And then at some point, you say, okay, I have enough units. I can go ahead and just end the game right here with a frontal assault. But this is the tricky part is, again, if your whole army is not in a frontal assault, it can be not quite as effective. Because we can see here, Illusion's a tuner food. But his army here is, it's only 32 Marines and 10 Marauders, which is 50 food, right? Plus 10 medevacs. He has 70 food here, right? So 130 food is elsewhere, which means 70 of that's SCVs, but he's missing 60 food. He has 70 food here, he has 60 food elsewhere. So he's really only fighting with half his army. And that's great as a distraction, but in this one situation, it's something you might want to avoid a little bit because it's not distracting for anything, right? So if you're not distracting for anything, you're not fighting with your full army, and the Zerg is fighting with their full army, that's where you kind of want to back up and wait for all your additional guys that are kind of just, you know, hanging around on the map, being rallied in to help reinforce. Also, of course, these moments from 3-3. So the great draw play put him significantly ahead, and then battles like this can kind of reset it just a little bit. But the real key thing here is that he realized it quickly. He backed away, waited for some more guys, and then he made the same mistake, I guess. But again, he backs away before he loses too many units, which is the very most important thing. And then he realized, okay, I bled away a bunch of units in those mistakes. I haven't got, I got enough advantage to end the game with an attack. I mismanaged the attack by attacking before I mustered my whole forces. So now I should go back to trying to regain the same advantage I had through that great draw play. So again, you can distract him over here. In this case, Moonglade's being distracted by coming out to attack Illusion. But it could have been the same if Illusion went to attack him. And that's where all of a sudden these drops can do devastating damage. You can kill the lair there, and I think there's another drop over here going into natural. And all of a sudden, this is a situation where the Zerg's all in, right? He can try to send a few units to defend. But right here is really what determines the game, is the fact that it actually wasn't here. It was basically back here. Here's what determined the game is right in this section. Because right here, right, when Moonglade moves out, Illusion has decided that, okay, Moonglade just won the battle. He's probably going to move out. I'm going to counterattack. And the worst thing that could happen here, right, in the worst situation, Moonglade backs up, defends, and the game continues on with me being at 5 base versus him at 4. The next step is maybe Moonglade can kill me with his army, but that means he won't have anything to defend. Will be in the base trade. I'm Terran, going to win the base trade. Or, of course, the ideal situation is I'll just enough to defend, especially with the planetaries. And then, meanwhile, I'll be doing a lot of damage with these drop counters as well. And as you can see here, with that drop doing so much damage in addition to the drop over here, Moonglade is basically stuck to an all-in. And even with great micro, even with a great engagement, Terran will eventually reproduce and be able to deal with this army. Moonglade has a lot of forces here, but of course they eventually get overwhelmed by enough routed reinforcements by Illusion. And now he can't continue the fight because he only has a few Hydras left. And in the meantime, he's lost his main. He's lost this base. He's lost this base. And he's basically he's lost this base as well. He's on to 1 base, right? So it's game over, right? Illusion's up by 40, supply 5 bases to 1. So the cool thing about that is to understand if you're playing first thing, if you want to do the 3-base speed roach build, you want to prioritize the lane and Terran third for as long as possible. From a Terran point of view, don't worry about taking a third too fast because the Zerg army is going to be stronger. Just be a little bit patient, wait till you have enough army to really move out, then take that 3rd base. Against Roach Hydra plays Terran, using drops is very, very good, and try to do multiple drops at once to distract the Zerg from as many different angles. But also try to avoid getting into those large-scale engagements if you're vastly outnumbered. If you have so many units out on a map doing other things, your other army, try to avoid engaging the entire Zerg army heads up because you're not going to trade super favorably. Then, of course, last of all, if you can ever get a Zerg stuck in the base race as a Terran player, you're going to end up winning that game because, of course, you have planetaries back to defend. You can defend choke points very well. Worst case, you can lift off buildings and hide in the corners, and the Zerg can't really do too much about it. So wraps up this segment of Rules of Engagement. We'll take a short break and be right on with segment number 2, talking about Illusion versus Moonglade and PvT engagements and how to handle those.